Good evening and welcome to the July 9th, 2019 San Bruno City Council meeting. I'd like to call this meeting to order and thank the Garden Club for the floral arrangement. I would ask City Clerk if you could please do roll.
Councilmember Davis? Here. Councilmember Medina?
Here.
Councilmember Salazar?
Here.
Vice Mayor O'Connell? Here. Mayor Medina?
Here. And may I ask our former mayor, Jim Ruane, to lead us in the pledge this evening. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Next item is number 3, public comments on items not on the agenda. As understanding from the city clerk, we do have some speaker cards, and if you could call them up to the podium.
We have 4 speaker cards currently, so I will call up each member in a queue. So if you could just line up in order of the names as I call them. We have John Barrelier, Sandra Perez Vargas, Bill Ruggiero, and Rich Fern.
Hi, I'm John Barrelier. I've lived in San Bruno for a long time. I'm living in Belmont right now, but I've got a history here. Sometimes things are right in front of us and we don't notice them. I was coming to the Senior Citizen Center for about 3 or 4 years before I noticed there was a woman who taught exercise, and she was extraordinary. I asked her friend, Joe, how long she's been doing this. She's been doing it for 30 years. She's a volunteer. She could use a job. In pursuit of prying some money loose from you, I requested some things from the San Bruno City Council. The information is incomplete. I requested salaries, donations, as far as homes, that's real estate, vehicles, and the cost of sending a fire truck shopping with 3 men over the course of 1 year and 1 time. I've requested the bingo income for 2018. I noticed tonight that we have a very full agenda, and I don't want to clog it with something more than the 3 minutes I have, but I'll come next meeting and confuse you further, enlighten you. You'll be uncomfortable. It will be embarrassing. But I have much more to say about this situation. As embarrassing as that short curtain there, which you didn't notice. That's a story in itself. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next speaker, please. Please, let's let the speakers speak without interruption from the audience. Next speaker, please.
Sandra Perez Vargas, followed by Bill Ruggiero.
Thank you. Good evening.
Hi, good evening. My comments are about our parking situation down on Huntington Avenue where the Public City Works are. I understand that there's a plan to get permit parking possibly for the employees. Although residents have been asking for parking permits, I thought it was interesting that that would be a preference first. I don't think we need parking permits for the employees because that whole Huntington area from San Felipe on, most of the cars that are taking up the parking are commercial vehicles that are illegally parked, boats, trailers that aren't hitched. So I think if the police were to come around constantly, clear out those cars, the employees would have plenty of parking. And I believe that's also true through most of our residential areas, where when the police see commercial vehicles or anything illegal, instead of waiting for residents to call, that they automatically tag them, move them on, and we'll have more parking. Because as you know, the new apartment building on San Mateo Avenue in El Camino, the minimum parking requirements were waived by parts of City Council and the former mayor. So now that that's opened up, we are dealing with many more congestion issues. We're getting a lot more cars on the street. So if the police could really step up enforcement on that, it would help the rest of us, and I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next speaker, please.
Bill Ruggiero, followed by Rich Fenn.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and City Council members. There's nothing on the agenda, but I have two items I want to call to your attention. One, I believe everybody would approve and support responsible development of commercial and residential properties in San Bruno. We need to make projects that make sense work. We need a mix of staff and citizen input on development projects. Therefore, I am requesting that you amend the current 600 feet notification area. It needs to be expanded. It is my opinion that notices of meetings of developments along the transit corridor plan projects need to go out to all property owners in San Bruno. We need to be able to create win-win situations for future housing and commercial developments. Proactively engaging residents will expedite this process. 2, at meetings when developers and staff have unlimited time to discuss their present projects and present their projects, residents should not be limited to 3 minutes. At a time when staff is pushing development projects forward, you need to find a way to allow residents to articulate their responses, and 3 minutes is just not enough time. You need to find a balance of time for developer and residents to respectfully present their information. I believe each of you care about our city and have a passion for its future success. Your actions should always support that. The motto of San Bruno is the city with a heart. I would like you to show that through your actions. Otherwise, change our motto to the city with a heart, as long as you can express it in under 3 minutes.
Thank you for your comment. Next speaker, please. Okay, let's refrain from the applause, please, so we can hear our speakers. Thank you very much.
Rich Fern, followed by Geraldine Nova.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. I just wanted to express a little thing about public parking again. I've been a resident here for over 30 years, and the other day, I have a fire hydrant right in front of my house, dead center of my house. And I know it's been great that the city's been making everybody park the right way, and that's really good because it's safety, big safety concern. But the big concern that I have is the fire hydrants there, none of them are painted red anywhere in San Bruno at all. Okay, so someone that's visiting our city, they may park near a fire hydrant, and they might get a ticket, so it's not really very welcome for people there. So maybe we might think about painting the fire hydrants red, because I went down and talked to Public Works and I asked them about it, and it says that supposedly the ordinance is 15 feet. Well, my property is only 50 feet wide, and if I had to be 15 feet on the other side of the fire hydrant, I'm not sure exactly how it's going to work. So maybe we could think about it and talk to the police department about, the fire hydrants, because we need them. But maybe we should paint the curves red so people know where they can and cannot park. Thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you for your comments. Next speaker, please.
Geraldine Nova, followed by Nova Midwinter.
And if you folks, when you hear your names, if you don't mind lining up, it'll help us. Thank you very much.
Good evening. My name is Geraldine Moran. I'm here this evening to talk to you about the urgency of the climate crisis right now. The city of San Bruno has opportunities to make a difference. I grew up here on the peninsula, and back in the 60s, things have changed quite a bit. I'm worried about my grandchildren's future and all the young people that are coming up. My background is in wildlife biology. I worry about all forms of life, but we have the power. Cities can do so much with building codes and energy efficiency. So just to keep it short, I'm very concerned, and I hope you are too, and I know you have the power to do a lot of really good things. So I urge you tonight to be open-minded to the possibilities and to consider being a leader as a city entity on this peninsula on climate mitigation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for your comments. Next speakers.
Nova Midwinter, followed by Alexander Lee.
Again, when you hear your name, if you don't mind coming up near the podium, it would be appreciated.
Hello, my name is Nova Midwinter. I'm 15 years old, and I'd like to express my general concern for the ongoing climate crisis, specifically in our city and also in California and the world at large. Climate change has been an issue for many, many years, and it's been only very recent that we've begun to address it, and I think it's really important that we make this a top priority in things like building codes and legislation and just our everyday lives, because it is going to directly affect the next generation, specifically my generation, my kids, my grandkids, and whether or not they can live good lives. Like, I don't know, climate change has already caused many natural disasters that specifically affected people I know and their families. It causes droughts and wildfires, which makes the air hard to breathe. Like in my school district, for a week, we had to wear masks outside because of a forest fire, which made the air like unbreathable normally. Like friends of mine with asthma were in serious danger. And I just think it's really important that we keep the climate in mind and pay close attention to it and monitor it and keep it like in our thoughts when we're choosing legislation and just living our lives in general. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next speaker, please.
Alexandra Lee, followed by Jalmera Cisneros.
Thank you. Start
Hi.
Forward. Thank you.
My name is Alexandra Lee, and I'm going to be a senior. And so, as the last two speakers talked about, I want to talk about the climate crisis that we are currently in. So, global CO2 levels have reached the highest they ever have in human history, and greenhouse gases in the atmosphere cause so many different problems. And it's easy to imagine that the climate crisis is in the future and it's not something that affects us now, but this is not true. It's happening right now, and it has a multitude of effects at both the global and the local level. For instance, the record-breaking wildfires in California last night drastically affected our lives. There were almost 1 million public school students who didn't go to school for a day, including right here at San Bruno Elementary School. And these wildfires are just the start. There have been more droughts that we also experienced, rising global temperatures, rising sea levels, melting ice, a whole range of effects at both the global and the local level. But luckily, there are things that we can do. And one of these things that I want you to consider right now is building reach codes. So building reach codes are an opportunity for cities to develop all-electric, carbon-free buildings that make our buildings both safer, healthier, and more affordable. And they also protect against the dangers and uncertainty of natural gas. There are currently 15 cities working with Peninsula Clean Energy and Silicon Valley Energy and other consultants to develop reach codes for the California, to sync with the statewide California Title 24 codes in 2020. And so as an opportunity to tour in an all-electric house, Project Green Home in Palo Alto is hosting a party on July 20th to celebrate 100,000 miles that we have given away from our free curbside charger. And this will have an opportunity to tour this all-electric, carbon-neutral, LEED Platinum Plus certified house, as well as test drive an electric vehicle and try cooking on an induction stove, which is often a barrier that people think about before going all-electric. So I strongly urge you to be a part of all of these other cities that are already considering reach codes and prioritize climate action and develop the adoption of these reach codes by September. Thank you, and I'm going to give these invitations to the clerk.
Thank you for that. And yes, you could hand them over to the clerk. Next speaker, please.
Jalmera Cisneros.
Oh, if you could just do that for 6A, please. Thank you. Okay, I'm being told by the clerk that's it for speaker cards for items that are not on the agenda. Is there anyone else? Please show your hand so I can see you if you want to speak on an item that's not on this agenda this evening. Okay, seeing none, we're going to move on to announcements and presentations. A few announcements and presentations we have. First one, the San Bruno Flea Market will be held in San Bruno City Park on July 21st from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. Next, we have the library will be hosting a summer reading, science fair, and ice cream social on Wednesday, July 24th from 2 to 4 p.m. There will be multiple hands-on STEM activities for all ages. Ice cream will be served promptly at 3, in case you want to time yourself. And then next, I'd like to receive a report from the San Bruno Police and Fire Departments regarding July 4th, 2019 public safety calls for service. Lieutenant.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor and City Council members. On July 4th, 2019, the Police Department handled a total of 280 incidents this year, 147 of which were fireworks related. These numbers were fairly consistent with those of recent years. For example, in 2018, we handled a total of 273 incidents, with 173 of those being fireworks related. Of the 147 fireworks related incidents this year, 52 were initiated by officers in the field, as opposed to a call for service from the public. This number is nearly double what it was last year, when 31 of the total fireworks calls were initiated by police officers. The San Bruno Police Department divides the city into 3 distinct areas known as beats. In very general terms, Beat 1 is essentially the area bordered by 280 to the west, 101 to the east, Sneath Lane to the north, and San Bruno Avenue to the south, but includes the avenues as well. Approximately 35% of the 4th of July incidents originated in the Beat 1 service area. Beat 2 is essentially the area bordered by 280 to the west, Huntington Avenue to the east, San Bruno Avenue to the north, and the south city limit. Approximately 39% of the 4th of July calls for service originated in this Beat 2 service area. Beat 3 is essentially everything else, everything west of 280. Approximately 26% of the 4th of July incidents this year originated on Beat 3. The peak activity period for calls for service began on the 4th of July at approximately 8 p.m. and tapered off significantly to near nothing shortly after 11 p.m. Staff engaged in a number of different efforts to educate the public and raise awareness of fireworks safety concerns and laws prior to the 4th of July holiday. These efforts included working with San Bruno Cable to provide public service announcements aired on Channel 1, including a video message from both the fire and police chiefs, disseminating flyers regarding fireworks safety and laws throughout all fireworks booths, conducting a meeting with all fireworks vendors to review rules and regulations on the sale of safe and sane fireworks, as well as reporting procedures for the use of illegal fireworks. We also issued multiple press releases and social media posts to our followership of approximately 20,000 individuals, and we regularly posted enforcement activity updates throughout the 4th of July, as well as on the 5th and 6th. In the days leading up to the 4th of July holiday, police department personnel also visited approximately 15 different locations where violations had been reported in past years. Officers spoke with residents at these locations about the use of illegal fireworks, including our enforcement efforts, penalties for the possession and use, as well as the danger these items pose to the public. Additionally, officers warned residents about the excessive consumption of alcohol, the impact large and unruly gatherings have on the community, and pedestrian safety issues on the 4th of July. In terms of enforcement, the police department deployed additional officers to conduct illegal fireworks enforcement from June 28th through July 7th. Officers patrolled for illegal fireworks and violations of safe and sane use, paying particular attention to open space areas. These officers were assigned during times of peak activity from 7 p.m. to 3 a.m. These efforts were hampered somewhat this year due to the shooting incident at Tan Fram Mall on July 2nd. Officers assigned to work fireworks enforcement that evening had to necessarily be reassigned. The police department also ordered all off-duty personnel to work on the 4th of July once again, canceling all regularly scheduled days off and time off. All personnel already working that day were required to maximize their hours at 16 hours for the shift. In addition to the normal patrol beats, fireworks enforcement teams were organized and assigned to geographic regions throughout the city from 6 p.m. on July 4th to 2 a.m. on July 5th. In all, 32 sworn and 14 non-sworn personnel worked this special enforcement detail. These efforts were also hampered somewhat by the Tan Fran shooting incident, as all of our investigative personnel were busy investigating the shooting and identifying the shooters. When officers were able to observe an individual using illegal fireworks, they made use of the city ordinance sections and issued administrative citations that carry a fine of $1,000 per violation. A special emphasis was placed this year on officers patrolling problem areas on foot and on bicycles. Additionally, non-uniformed officers were deployed to direct uniformed staff to issue citations for observed violations. This proactive effort resulted in a total of 21 administrative citations for the use and/or possession of dangerous fireworks on the 4th of July. The issuance of citations occurred throughout the city. As in years past, there were pockets of increased activity. These pockets existed in all different service areas of the city. Existing municipal code sections allow for the enforcement of anyone that allows, causes, maintains, or permits a violation to exist or continue by an act or omission. This year, all citations were issued to individuals found to be in possession of or actively using illegal fireworks. However, video is currently being reviewed to determine whether or not additional citations should be issued and are merited for residents that allowed this activity. Of the 21 individuals that were cited this year, 10 were San Bruno residents, 11 were not. Approximately 75 pounds of illegal fireworks were seized this year. This is approximately double the amount typically seized on the 4th of July, although last year we had a single seizure of over 300 pounds, which skewed the numbers somewhat. The fire department responded to 8 fireworks-related calls on the 4th of July, which Chief Cresta will discuss more momentarily. There were no pedestrian safety issues reported. When contacting large groups celebrating the holiday, officers generally receive the necessary cooperation. However, both dispatchers and officers in the field regularly interacted with individuals who were angry at either a perceived lack of enforcement or because they felt we were enforcing too proactively. Of course, non-fireworks related calls for service do not stop on the 4th of July, as indicated by our response to approximately 130 non-fireworks related incidents on that same day. Incidents of note that required substantial police resources included a protracted search for a subject that breached security at our Marine Reserve base. This subject was ultimately located and arrested. There was also a DUI hit-and-run collision in the avenues, in which the suspect struck 3 vehicles and fled on foot, being apprehended a short distance away. Although you are very aware, I believe that it is important to note that the preparation and response to this holiday is a collaborative effort that requires a great deal of planning. A preliminary cost estimate for this year's education and enforcement programs citywide, including all participating departments, is just over $52,000. The calculated costs only include what is done above and beyond the normal course of business to prepare and work the 4th of July holiday. I'd like to acknowledge the work of the Police Department command staff for developing a thorough and comprehensive operations plan, as well as all of the officers, dispatchers, community service officers, and police clerks who spent yet another 4th of July holiday away from their families to try and keep our city safe. Additionally, I'd like to recognize the Community Services Department, who assigned 4 staff members to monitor activity at the parks throughout the city on the 4th of July. And I extend my appreciation to the Public Services Department, whose staff picked up approximately 8 cubic yards of trash, mostly expended fireworks, following the holiday. Finally, I'd like to thank the fire department, who once again worked hand in hand with the police department personnel to provide for a safe evening. As you might imagine, the police department receives a great deal of feedback regarding 4th of July activities. This feedback includes criticism that enforcement efforts are not adequate, and we receive video and anecdotal accounts of the use of illegal fireworks and other unruly behavior associated with the holiday. On the other hand, we also receive a substantial amount of criticism that our enforcement efforts are too robust and too proactive. We hear from many individuals who do not believe we should expend the resources we do. They feel that this activity only occurs a few days a year and does not require the attention we give it. The police department empathizes with all of our residents regardless of their position on our enforcement levels. Our primary concern is to do our best to provide for a holiday that is as safe and enjoyable for all as possible. As we do following every large event or operation, the police department evaluates the effectiveness of its planning, strategy, and tactics to make adjustments accordingly. We will conduct this same evaluation and make necessary adjustments to enhance our efforts for next year's holiday. That conducts my presentation, and I'd like to turn it over to Chief Cresta to speak a little more about the fire operations.
Thank you, Lieutenant Chief.
Thank you, Mayor Medina, members of the council. Dave Cresta, your fire chief, with a summary of our response on the 4th of July. As Lieutenant said, we did have 8 fireworks-related calls on the 4th. We had 1 on July 3rd, which was a small fire started with Safe and Sane Fireworks at Cappuccino. It just started a little bit of nearby dry grass, didn't cause any damage. Of the calls on the 4th, 4 were smoke investigations, which most likely did not result in fires. We investigated. Most likely they were either fireworks being shot off in the area that didn't result in any sort of fire incident. The rest, the 4 incidents, 2 were trash fires, meaning that they were most likely Safe and Sane fireworks discarded improperly in a trash container, and it damaged only the trash container. We had a fire in a trash can on Sherwood adjacent to a residence that luckily was discovered very early and was able to be extinguished prior to it caused a little bit of damage to the exterior of the home. That was Safe and Sane fireworks discarded in the trash can. And then we had a structure fire in Toyon that caused us to have extended on-scene time and resources to a structure fire that started in the garage. Safe and Sane fireworks discarded improperly in the garage. The resident had them there, forgot, unattended them for a period of time, and a fire started in the garage. Luckily, we were able to make a stop before it entered into it got up into the attic and got into a little bit of the house, but we were able to make a pretty good aggressive stop on it. And however, it did cause about $200,000 damage to that residence. So all in all, it was about the same kind of the same response we had last year. We had about 9 firework-related incidents last year. So that's all my report. So we're here for any questions if you have any.
Thank you, Chief. Any questions of council to Lieutenant or Chief? Irene?
Thank you so much, both of you, for your very thorough report. Were there any injuries, either from safe and sane or from illegal?
We did not respond to any medicals related to fireworks, no.
Well, that's fabulous. That's something to be thankful for. Thank you.
Laura?
So fireworks becomes an ongoing discussion in San Bruno, and I know that you hear the comments from residents that just think, why do we have fireworks? This is what's causing a lot of these illegals. For a lot of residents, I'm sure those with animals continually suffer for the weeks leading up to it and even following it. Plans on the 4th of July had to be canceled because of our animals. I drove around the city, saw a lot of stuff. One of the things I noticed too is a lot of residents not obeying the rules where if you're lighting off safe and sane, they should really be in front of your driveway and your property. They're lighting them off in the center of the street. They're lighting off in the center of the intersections. So it's really helpful for all of us and as we as residents to see it, spot it, educate, let people know what the right thing to do is. But it's a challenging job. Even navigating through the city streets is challenging. So I definitely really appreciate everything you do. What I will say, throughout the peninsula, whether it's San Bruno or any other city that does not have safe and sane, illegal fireworks are going off everywhere. The first thing I did when I arrived to work on Friday was ask all coworkers who live all sorts down peninsula, and it was crazy everywhere. And so I know that it was voted in by the people to continue to sell safe and sane fireworks, and the police and the fire do the best you can to keep our city safe, and we really appreciate that. So thank you.
And finally, I was just going to say I did go to the police and other personnel briefing on the 4th and did do a ride-along, bless you, and did do a ride-along, and so and responded to, on Sherwood, the trash fire. So what I do want to say is somewhat what Laura had said. The resources that are expended are received in return back from the booth sales, and that pays for that additional services. And in other communities, they staff it at status quo because it's not in the budget for otherwise. So with the other incidences that you also mentioned, Lieutenant, that were going on as you were patrolling and doing your jobs, I want to thank both departments, Community Service, Public Works, who collectively work together, and I saw it firsthand, and so I want to thank both departments and the other staff for the work and the job you did, so thank you. Next, I've asked Lieutenant if he could give us a review summary of the incident that occurred at the shops at Tan Fran on July 2nd. I'm sure all of you are aware, but I thought the community might want a brief update and also understand it is an ongoing investigation, so understand as far as questions or those type of things, they have to be limited and or kept to this point. Lieutenant.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On Tuesday, July 2nd, 2019 at 3:56 p.m., the police department started receiving multiple reports of an active shooter in the food court at Tan Fran Mall. Due to the mall's proximity to the police station, officers were on scene within seconds and immediately encountered a very chaotic scene that included hundreds of people frantically fleeing the area. Acting on information that the shooting occurred on the second level above the food court, officers immediately assembled response teams and pressed forward to that location. Upon arrival on the second level, officers located 2 gunshot wound victims, both teenage males. One victim was suffering from multiple gunshot wounds to the abdomen, and the other from at least 1 gunshot wound to the leg. There was a military recruiter who had been stationed at the mall attending to the victim with the abdominal injuries when we arrived. An officer immediately took to assisting him, while another officer applied a combat action tourniquet to the leg of the other victim. Other officers worked to secure this area so that medical teams could quickly evacuate our victims. A countywide request for mutual aid was broadcasted, and outside agencies responded immediately. A tactical command post was established, and force protection teams were promptly assembled with police, fire, and medical personnel. Within minutes of the original call, these force protection teams entered a very unstable and dangerous scene and successfully evacuated both victims for transport to area trauma centers. Both victims are expected to survive. A large perimeter was established around Tanforan Mall as multiple SWAT teams responded to assist with a search for suspects. Suspect descriptions available to responding personnel at this point were vague and inconsistent, but a large-scale search of the entire mall property was coordinated and initiated nonetheless. No suspects or additional victims were located during that search. The subsequent investigation into this incident is still underway. As a result, there are many details that investigators are aware of, but which cannot be shared publicly at this time in order to protect the integrity of the investigation. What we can tell you is that this shooting stemmed from a dispute between two groups of 6 to 10 people. During this dispute, one subject from each group produced a firearm and fired multiple rounds at the other group. Both victims struck by gunfire were members of the same group involved in the dispute. Both shooters fled the scene in opposite directions immediately following the shooting and managed to exit mall property before a perimeter was established. Shell casings from at least 2 different firearms, along with a substantial amount of other evidence, was located at our crime scene. Through a great deal of tenacious diligence by our investigators and a tremendous amount of assistance from other agencies, including the San Francisco Police Department, who's played an instrumental role, we believe that we've identified nearly all of the people involved in this incident. One of the shooters and his accomplice, both male juveniles, have already been arrested and are being charged. One of the firearms believed to have been used in this incident has in fact been recovered, as have others. The other shooter has been identified as San Francisco resident DeAndre Lejean Gant. He is described as an 18-year-old black male adult, 6 feet tall and weighing 205 pounds. Multiple law enforcement agencies are currently zeroing in on Gant's location in an effort to secure his arrest. More than a dozen law enforcement agencies responded from throughout the Bay Area to our urgent request for assistance at this incident. Countless officers from San Bruno and our partner agencies fairly ran into what they believe to be an extremely dangerous active shooter scenario in an area of the mall that simply cannot be accessed safely under these circumstances. Fire and medical personnel also braved exceedingly dangerous conditions to facilitate immediate evacuations of critically injured victims. This incident serves as yet another example of the exceptional work done by the brave men and women who serve as first responders throughout this entire county, and also displays the effectiveness with which these various entities work together during critical incidents. This concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to field questions from council, but please again understand there are many aspects of the investigation I cannot discuss.
Any questions, comments at this point? No? What I was going to say was, Lieutenant, thank you for the detailed report. I also want to say that being at the mall after all was going on, and seeing the call that went out, and once again, and in the YouTube shooting, the response for the mutual aid from our neighbors was impressive. It's also something that I've heard of a post, or I was asked a few times, early on in the conversation is, well, how couldn't we have got them? And I think, as you've indicated, it's not that they just ran to BART. There's a lot of things that we may not all know that go on. But I clearly want to make it evident that I believe almost all of this community is appreciative for what you did, and the men and women in public safety, fire, and others. We had the streets department closing down streets. So as far as myself, I have seen it, unfortunately, twice in my term as mayor. And I'm extremely proud, and I stand with the public safety personnel in the police department. I stand with law enforcement for what they do for people that come into our community, have no regard for life, shooting in a food court because of some argument. And I'm glad 2 were caught, and I'm glad the other one in my heart will be caught, and they should be held accountable, as the chief said. So for myself in this council, I want to thank the men and women. Please convey that, and I think the community also stands by you too.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, now we're going to receive an annual report from the Citizens Crime Prevention Committee.
Good Good evening, Mayor Medina and City Council members, and thank you for providing us with an opportunity to review the Citizen Crime Prevention Committee report. In the spirit of environmental sustainability, we will not be providing handouts, but we do have the screen, so please put your focus and attention onto our presentation. We can hopefully get this to work. Okay, our committee members are comprised of myself, Deanna Robinson, I'm the chair. We have Rhonda Boone, who is the vice chair, and then we have members at large, Peter Carey, Mary Mahon, Val Morgan, Robert Reichel, Richard Wong, and we're supported by Councilmember Marty Medina, so thank you, as well as Officer Sherry Campbell, who is our police department liaison. One of the key goals of our committee is to assist San Bruno residents with establishing and maintaining neighborhood watch programs. And we continue to explore ways to gain greater participation. So I see that there's a lot of people here, and we definitely welcome you. If you do not have a neighborhood watch program, please reach out to us, and we'll be more than happy to help you out. Currently, we have about 33 different neighborhood watch programs and groups, and we are continuing to work and identify additional ways to gain greater participation. Part of what we do is encourage the formation of groups, and we work with residents who have expressed interest in the Neighborhood Watch program. And we also do quite a bit of work in advertising our programs that we have, and we'll be sharing some of that with you. Other key accomplishments are our citizen crime prevention video, which we will be sharing with you momentarily. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and play a quick. This is going to work. Apologies. There we go. Good. Where she's at now. One moment. Should just play it. Well, hopefully we will.
Go back.
Oh. Oh. Yeah. Okay, keep going. It's later. Got it. There she goes. All right, other activities that we have are the Police Recognition Day at Tan Fran, where we've actually helped with setting up and the takedown of the different participants booths. We've actually had quite a few participation from local city representatives from Colma, Burlingame, San Mateo, and so they were actually helping with part of that process. And as a committee, we actually share a lot of our crime prevention literature. There's actually some of the slides that we have with our police chief, Ed Barberi, and our mayor, as well as some of our members. Hopefully this is going to be our crime prevention. Here we go.
So good to see you. I'm glad you're able to come over.
I heard you got a bike for Christmas.
I did.
That's
What did you
awesome.
get?
I got a nice hat and a beautiful skirt.
Oh, that's wonderful. Do you know that guy? No. He looks suspicious.
Aren't they out of town?
They are. We should call the police.
Hello. There's someone. We're Neighborhood Watch, and that's what we do.
We were able to feature this video on San Bruno Cable as well as on YouTube, and so we have actually gotten quite a few views, and it's a great way for us to kind of get more information about our committee out to local residents and hopefully gain greater participation. Other things that we've done is Community Day in the Park. It's actually a really great time for us to really connect with our residents. We found that to be a little bit more helpful than when we're actually at Tan Fran because we get a lot of people from different cities, and we definitely want to encourage our residents of San Bruno to get engaged with the community. The other things that we do are a National Night Out, which has been a big event. It's the first Tuesday of every August. And this is where we have an opportunity to encourage our residents to, and our Neighborhood Watch block captains, to host parties where they can actually engage with the community. It also provides residents with an opportunity to meet and greet with our mayor or city council members, as well as our police and San Bruno Fire Department. So these are some of the events that we had actually here at Grundy Park, and so we do that actually every year. I'm going to turn it over now to my colleague, Peter Carey.
Thank you. We also had our booth at Assemblyman Mullins Health Fair at Tan Fran Mall, his health and safety fair every year. Some of the other activities and accomplishments of the Crime Prevention Committee have been to distribute safe and crime prevention information, brochures at City Hall, the library, senior center, rec center, safety and crime prevention literature on Neighborhood Watch, DNA collection kit, making directions to fill it out, reporting suspicious activity brochures, and child safety information.
The video's up, right?
And
National Night Out is a grassroots community event which started in 1984 in about 400 communities in 23 states. National Night Out enhances the relationship between neighbors and law enforcement while bringing back a true sense of community.
Important aspects of National Night Out is the fact that it's an event that's generated and initiated by our community. The police department is excited and eager to go out into the community, into our neighborhoods, to speak with residents, interact with residents, have a snack or a soda with residents in an informal, relaxed atmosphere where we can exchange information, hear the concerns of people in the community, and learn how we can do our jobs better and be more effective in promoting a safer and stronger San Bruno.
okay. As I said, we distributed crime prevention information, Neighborhood Watch, different brochures throughout. We've also, the committee has shared informational slides at the safety fairs and other citizen crime prevention presentations highlighting the committee and the police department collaboration. Maintain communication with Neighborhood Watch groups, distributed crime prevention tips for public information, and posted on the San Bruno Cable Television informational channel. We've also updated posting of meeting agendas and minutes of the San Bruno Police Department Crime Prevention Committee webpage. Prepared a National Night Out flyer to be distributed by block captains and also distributed to the general public. Planned in and participated in multiple locations August 7th, 2018 for the National Night Out in San Bruno. We've attained pencils, stickers, other gear to give out at our safety coloring books, attained from a state legislator at our informational table. We've also obtained child DNA kits for distribution at our information table during events. Our goals for the upcoming year is more of the Neighborhood Watch outreach to local merchants on San Mateo Avenue to possibly host an event, work with the local schools to get them involved. On National Night Out, we're trying to get the word out more, working with the schools, hopefully with Bel Air and others for the National Night Out event. Neighborhood Watch incentives to reach out to local insurance agencies to see if you might meet some discounts in your policies. We have the police department has a security camera sign up where you can register your security cameras to inform the PD as far as who has them, so assist them in solving some problems. We're going to see about creating a flyer for residents and business, and each month we have crime tips that are on San Bruno Cable, posted every month. I would like to thank council, staff, liaison, Marty, certainly the San Bruno Police Department, the Chief, Officer Sherry Campbell, and Officer Howard Hoye, who's been our liaison. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. Questions from council? Please, Marty.
Yes, Lion Peter, I would like to thank you and the committee for the work you have done in the last year and continuing forward, and it was absolute pleasure to work with all of you, so thank you very much on that.
Great. Anything else, council? Robert, Peter, where did Deanna go? There she goes. Just wanted to thank all of you, and please take back to the committee our appreciation and thanks for the work that you do and the volunteer that you give to the community, and I'm sure we'll see you at National Night Out.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Really quick, I just wanted to highlight that if anybody's interested, we meet the second Thursday of every month at 7 p.m. at City Hall, Conference Room 113. Thank you.
And the question just came up, do we know when National Night Out is?
August 6th.
So August 6th. Thank
August
you.
6th.
Thank you. So as we're going to move on to consent calendar, before we begin, we're trying to make sure we have all the speaker cards for those that want to speak, because we're hitting a mark, and I'm trying to gauge, the time frame, and that's going to equate to 2 hours at this point for what we have. If it's 3 minutes. So anyway, what we would appreciate is in the back we have Jennifer and Vicky, who you can give a speaker card to, and then we'll get that up front. So as we go through the consent calendar, it would be very much appreciated if that can be done. Thank you. We'll move on to consent.
All items on the consent calendar are considered routine or implement an earlier council action and may be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion unless requested.
Items for some additional information or discussion. Marty. Mike.
I had I wanted to acknowledge that item 5E is a project of $8.5 million for our sewer project, and I'd like to pull that so that we can hear more about this project and acknowledge the significance of what's going on in our capital improvement program.
Okay, so we don't need a separate vote, but you just so the public can hear and get that. Okay. Are there other items or any items to be pulled? Okay, if not, let's go to item E, and that is a resolution approving the design. And if staff can just give a little, there's Mr. Tan. For the large project that Mr. Medina was talking about, which it totals in a budget of $8,597,682.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the City Council. This project is to replace the many aging water and sewer pipelines within the areas bounded by Cemetery Avenue, Huntington Avenue, Taylor Avenue, and Florida Avenue, which we're calling it the Avenues 1-1 and 1-2 area. And this project, again, it will replace about 7,900 feet of water pipeline and 6,000 feet of sewer pipelines. And both water and sewer are being replaced at the same time to minimize the construction impacts to the public. And after the pipelines are constructed, the city will reconstruct the street as well. The project went out to bid back in May and as well as early June. And we had a total of 4 bids. The price ranged from $6.5 million to about $8.7 million, and the lowest bid was received by JMB Construction of it's again, as mentioned, at $6.5 million. And JMB has worked for the city on many other sewer projects, one being the Cemetery Avenue Water and Sewer Replacement Project. They're also currently working on the Lomita and Crestmore Pump Station Replacement Project, and they completed the Genevan Sewer Replacement Project as well last year. So this project will likely begin towards the end of this year, once we get all the construction materials, submittals are been reviewed. So there'll be some impacts to all the residents living within the project area. There'll be temporary road closures, there'll be noise, there'll be dust, and there's some temporary service interruptions will be encountered when we switch over the water services, at the residential areas, and in and out, access in and out of these private properties will be impacted. But the city will have a community meeting prior to the construction of the project. We'll send out notifications for the meeting, and we'll have a gathering to determine what the concerns that the residents may have in regards to the construction. So we'll be doing that within the next couple of months or so. So as you mentioned, the cost is about $8.5 million, and it's due to additional costs related to construction support services for the consultant, as well as contingency of about $1 million that's being allocated for this project. Also, please note that many times the city has come to council for these water and sewer main replacement project where we have contracted with the construction management and inspection firms. You can see that it's not part of this project, and the reason why is because the city is planning to do the inspection in-house to try to save more money for the on this project. So this concludes my presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Marty.
The first bullet point in the staff report mentions that the regulatory deadlines are for these sewer projects is by 2019. Are we on target, or how many more do we need to do, or where are we with our compliance?
Yeah, so these are not capacity-related projects. Capacity-related projects were very close to completion, except for one, which is Crestwood Sewer Pipeline project, which has been delayed due to some issues with easements with PG&E issues that we were dealing with. But the Crystal Springs Road sewer replacement project was recently completed. The Cemetery Avenue was completed. The Genevan sewer main replacement was also completed. And San Antonio sewer pipeline project was also part of the Lomita and Crestmore sewer pump station project, which is currently under construction. So we're pretty much almost done, except for the Crestwood pipeline project.
And if I can ask, do we have any assurances from the regulators that we're okay with this delay due to the reasons you stated?
Yes, we've notified. We have an annual report that we have to submit to the baykeepers, and we've notified the schedule on there to let them know, what's going on. So they haven't really come back to the city for additional information.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else?
Through the chair.
Yeah, Michael.
I ask this often, but a few years ago we eliminated funding for the city maintenance of laterals, and so I'm wondering if there could be an opportunity for residents to take advantage of the ongoing construction to replace laterals if it's required for them, and maybe avoid the additional expense of having to dig up the street and encroachment permits and everything that's required.
Correct. So with that, the city has been sending out letters to the residents prior to construction of this project to let them know what the overall cost for the lateral replacement. But it's part of a bid item that's been included as part of the project. For the Crystal Springs Road project, we replaced 5 sewer laterals along Crystal Springs Road. Not all residents, participate. So we'll be doing the same thing here in this area. We'll send out letters to notify them about, the unit price cost that's been included as part of JMB's contract, and to determine whether they want to participate or not.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Any action from council on the consent calendar?
Move to approve.
Second.
It's been a motion made and seconded to approve all items on consent. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Unanimous by voice vote. Okay, we're going to move into the public hearing. And again, any speaker cards would be appreciated if they be filled out so we can get an assessment. And so why don't we go ahead and introduce the item, and then we'll pause.
Item 6A, hold public hearing and take the following actions to approve the Mills Park Center mixed-use development. Adopt a CEQA conformity determination for the proposed mixed-use development at Mills Park Center. Waive first reading and introduce an ordinance amending Section 12.96.020 of Title 12 Land Use of the San Bruno Municipal Code to change the zoning map from the Commercial C to the Planned Development P-D district with the development plan for the property for the proposed mixed-use development at Mills Park Center. Adopt a resolution approving a planned development permit and architectural review permit for the proposed mixed-use development at Mills Park Center. Adopt a resolution approving a phased vesting tentative tract subdivision map for condominium purposes for the proposed mixed-use development at Mills Park Center. Adopt a resolution authorizing installation of loading zone spaces around the perimeter of the site for the Mills Park Center mixed-use development. And waive first reading and introduce an ordinance approving a development agreement and affordable housing plan for the proposed mixed-use development at Mills Park Center.
Thank you. Council members, you want to state your recusal, please?
Okay. I am recusing myself because I own property within the 1,000 feet radius of the development.
Michael?
And before I state that portion of it, I wanted to make it clear to the public, because it's been asked about whether or not Irene and I are required to step down or if it's a choice. And I know some members of the public have been told that it is our choice to step down. And while we are making that choice to step down, I wanted to reiterate that we are mandated by the state to avoid conflicts of interest. And both Irene and I have a conflict of interest where we are in a position where, because of where we live, we stand to either profit or be harmed by the project. And so, because we have that financial conflict of interest, the rules that are mandated by the state say that we must recuse ourselves. If we were not to recuse ourselves, we could not only put the city in an awkward situation, but also face financial fines ourselves. And so I am choosing to leave the dais for this item because I do live within the project area. But I wanted everybody to understand that it is not a casual decision that we make. We are actually required. I did verify with the FPPC that in this particular case, we are, in fact, required to leave the dais and leave the room during the discussion. So because I do live within the 500 feet of this project, I, too, am recusing myself.
Thank you both for that and the explanation. Okay, so folks, we know there's a lot of folks that are here. I think we'll get some more speaker cards up. So I want to see, it's important that the folks that came and do get heard. Understanding, normally it's 3 minutes. If we have to go to 2, it'll just depend on how many speaker cards, but it's important. That's why I'm asking for them all to come in. Hold on, let me finish. It's going to be a long night, so let's get through this together. But I want everybody to be heard, but it would be very helpful if all the speaker cards come up, and then when they are in, at that point, we want to make sure we get all the speakers. So we're going to do the speakers earlier, that's after staff and the applicant, so that if you folks do need to leave. Okay, Steve, Mr. Freitas. So if you are speaking and you want to say a show of hands of this, if you want to say, you get up and you say, you know what, I echo the speaker that was just up, that's okay too. That would help us speed up. What's going to be important too is the city clerk is going to call up folks like 4 or 5 at a time. And so if you could come close to the podium and kind of get set, it would be helpful, because I know folks want to be heard, and I know we want to get through this. And I would just ask that as we hear from folks, that we, as this community always has, be respectful and professional to each other and to the speaker. And for that, I would suggest and ask that we not have applause or jeers or cheers. It's hard sometimes to come up and speak. It's not a comfortable situation. There's a lot of people in the room. So out of respect to each of our speakers, I would suggest that we all refrain from that, and so we can get to everybody and we don't need to limit time. So I appreciate that in advance. And why don't we go ahead and go to staff, please.
Sure.
Good afternoon, Mayor, City Council, members of the public. My name is Jovan Grogan, and I'm the City Manager for the City of San Bruno. Tonight's public hearing represents the culmination of 3 years' worth of work from the applicant, staff, consultants, and 2 advisory bodies to the City Council, those being the Architectural Review Committee and the Planning Commission. Darcy Smith, who's directly to my left, is our Community Development Director, and she'll give the staff presentation tonight. She'll then be followed by the applicant that will give a short presentation. Then we'll have questions from the City Council on the staff presentation, and then we will have public comment. After public comment, we will then return to the Council for deliberation. I know this project, which staff is recommending for approval, has been the subject of much debate at the Planning Commission and the various community meetings that were held on the project. And to those of you that have followed this project closely, Ms. Smith's detailed presentation will be much of a repeat of what you heard at those community presentations and at the Planning Commission. However, this is the first time this project is before the City Council for approval, and it is important that we provide a thorough overview of not only the project, but the Transit Corridors Plan and Measure N that was adopted by 86% of San Bruno voters in 2014, which increased height and density to allow for a project like this. The staff report was published. I just totaled up 670 pages is what all of the documents have been gathered over the course of that time. And so there's been a lot of work done. We're going to step through it as methodically as we can. And again, we are here. We have the city attorney to my right, and we have Ed Schaefer, who has been a contract city attorney working on the development agreement, also here. Quick overview of the project. The project is a mixed-use project that is anchored at the corner of San Bruno Ave and El Camino Real. It contains 425 condominium dwelling units and approximately 41,000 square feet high-end grocer, an additional 4,000 square feet of ground floor commercial space, a total of 879 parking stalls on site. Important to note that is 72 parking stalls above what is required by city codes. Total size of the project is 5.38 acres. The project also includes transportation demand measures, including 278 bicycle parking stalls. The project also includes a number of community benefits, and I'll highlight just a few, but we will go through them in detail. The first that I'll highlight is a $10 million payment to the city, up to a $10 million payment to the city in the way of community benefit, staggered as the units are occupied. Affordable housing, 64 affordable housing units at various income affordability levels, very low, low, and moderate. A 55-year restriction on the affordability, 10 years above what is required by city codes, only 45 years is required. A requirement that the grocer space be a high-end grocer. The creation of 9 public parking spaces for use by the city directly adjacent to the library. Installation of a new traffic signal at Canes and El Camino Real. And extension of a right turn lane from the eastbound San Mateo Ave to the southbound El Camino Real. And so with that, I'll turn it over to our Community Development Director that will go through the specifics of the project in detail. Darcy.
Thanks. Good evening, Honorable Mayor and members of the City Council. My name is Darcy Smith. I'm the Community and Economic Development Director for the city, and I'll be presenting you with a report on this project. The agenda for my staff presentation is to review the objective of tonight's public hearing, provide you with the detailed project description and history of the project, a detailed project analysis touching on some important key topics such as height, massing, traffic, and parking, and then summarize with the council actions before you tonight and end with any questions for staff. The objectives of tonight's meeting are based on the staff recommendation. There's a number of items for you to take action on tonight. The first would be to adopt the CEQA conformity determination. Next, to waive the first reading and introduce an ordinance that would amend the zoning map to change the zoning from commercial to planned development with a development plan for the project. Next, to adopt a resolution approving a planned development permit and architectural review permit. Then to adopt a resolution approving the phased vesting tentative subdivision map for condominium purposes, and then to adopt a resolution authorizing the installation of on-street loading zones around the perimeter of the site as shown on the site plan. And finally, waive the first reading and introduce an ordinance approving the development agreement and the associated affordable housing plan. So I'll start with the project description and history. The project site is located at the southwest corner as shown here. The bordering streets are San Bruno Avenue and El Camino Real. This site is occupied by what's commonly referred to as the Mills Park Center, which is a commercial center with a number of small retail, restaurant, and office tenant spaces, and 601 to 611 El Camino Real with smaller existing commercial uses. Important to note that the general plan land use designation for this site was changed over 10 years ago when the city adopted the city's general plan. Then the implementation of that general plan was approved by the City Council in 2013, over 6 years ago, with the transit corridor specific plan. It's really important to emphasize that laid out the zoning for the site, and that zoning permits the high density housing that you see tonight proposed and commercial uses. That transit corridor plan went through an extensive community process, and one of the measures that came out of that community process were setbacks and very specific transition measures for projects such as this that are adjacent to low density residential neighborhoods, which I'll describe more detail about later. To implement this specific plan, the Measure End, which was a ballot measure which was approved by 68% of the voters in 2014, changed the height, and as I attached to the staff report for this, the maps for that clearly showed that the allowable height was increased by 20 feet or 2 stories for the entire project site. That transit corridor plan is a long-range plan that has roughly a 20-year time frame for build-out, and the maximum amount of development permitted under that plan was 610 dwelling units, about 150,000 square feet of new retail space, roughly 1 million square feet of office space, and 190 hotel rooms. So with this transit corridor plan, there was an associated program EIR that was also certified by the city, and significant unavoidable impacts specifically related to traffic impacts at nearby intersections were disclosed and went through a very exhaustive public process, with the City Council ultimately approving a statement of override for those significant unavoidable impacts. So the vision for this specific site, as permitted by that transit corridors plan, was high-density residential. And it's important to note that the plan encouraged and even incentivized parcel assembly, such as a project like this, and envisioned that the projects would largely be built on these larger assembled sites. The plan doesn't stipulate a maximum project size or site, only the maximum number of units, which is 610. And also, only 154 of those units have been approved to date. So in terms of the total build-out, which we're 6 years into, we're really only scratching the surface. While this is a very large project before you tonight, right now the city is not processing any other planning applications for residential development in the transit corridor plan, nor have we had any inquiries for development. So I think we've seen 83 units completed, most recently at the Aperture, and again, we've only approved 154 units. The plan vision for El Camino Real was very clear in that corridor plan. It was taller and more dense mixed-use development, office and residential complexes focused around Caltrain, bus, such as El Camino and BART, to create pedestrian-friendly streets. And it's important to emphasize that the vision was that these new transit-oriented developments not only add character to the area, but also form an important base of new residents, workers, and economic opportunities for the transit corridors area. So this plan was not just a development plan, it was really an economic initiative plan. So the project description, as mentioned by the city manager, is 2 buildings. They're on separate blocks and would be envisioned to be built under separate construction permits and potential timeframes. The heights do range substantially from 1 stories to the west side and 5 stories on the El Camino Real side, which are divided into smaller components with a significant amount of articulation and building setbacks and stepbacks. There is a total of 425 condominium dwelling units, an approximately 42,000 square foot high-end grocery store, 4,000 square feet of ground floor commercial space, 879 total parking stalls, and a 5.38 total acre project site. This is a project rendering which is shown looking southwest on the El Camino Real frontage. And as you can see, the proposed grocery store would anchor this corner, and it's important to note that the transit corridor plan does require retail uses on this corner. So this project cannot be 100% residential. There is a requirement for retail uses to anchor that corner and create a lively environment. And I'll walk through the site plan very briefly, go into a little bit more detail later, but you'll see the north block here, which has the grocery store on the corner. It takes up a substantial amount, and the rest of the ground floor is parking. And on that north block, there's 182 units, 435 parking spaces. On the south block, which is south of Canes, you'll see here the entire ground floor is parking with more underground parking. Then above that, you have 4 floors of residential units, a little more residential units there, 243. The 4,000 square feet of commercial space, which again anchors the corner of Canes and El Camino Real, and an amenity space here, which would front the library. That would be sort of a clubhouse office space, and there would be an on-site fitness room too for the residents to use. Also important to note that the site plan was designed to focus the vehicular traffic on El Camino Real. So the commercial entrance to the grocery store is on El Camino Real. There is another entrance to the this garage off of White Way, which would remain open and accessible as a public street. The main residential access would be off of Canes Avenue, shown here. And there would also be some access again off of White Way. It's important to emphasize there's absolutely no access along Linden Avenue. And the whole focus of creating this new signalized intersection here at El Camino Real and Canes is to ensure that the vehicles entering and exiting this project site have an accessible, safe way and a safe turning movement into and out the site of the signalized intersection. And that the traffic would be focused on the arterials such as El Camino Real and San Bruno Avenue. So as part of the site plan, again, the vehicles would enter and exit primarily on El Camino Real with limited access from Canes and White Way for residential only. Canes Avenue would be redesigned and realigned. Right now there's a curve which kind of not only interferes with vehicular flow and safety, but Canes Avenue does not meet the minimum required width for the fire access, so there's some safety concerns there that would be alleviated. And again, that new signal light would be installed at the applicant's expense on El Camino Real to improve access in and out of the site. Also provide a really nice pedestrian connection across El Camino Real at a signalized intersection. Some other key street features to emphasize with this project are that Camino Plaza and White Way, those are existing streets, but they are not owned by the city in fee title. They are owned by the 2 existing property owners and have been since they were put in the 40s. The city only has public easements over those streets. They only serve the adjacent parcels, and as currently configured, those parcels will all be merged and redeveloped as part of this project. So therefore, the city has deemed that those streets are no longer necessary for public use and could be incorporated into the project. But as I pointed out, White Way on Block B would continue to operate as it does now to provide vehicular access, provides an access to San Bruno Avenue, and that would remain open to the public. The city will be required, if this project's approved, to take a future action which would vacate its interest in these streets and would also process the abandonment and dedication of other public streets and easement rights and private property rights to enable the realignment of the Keynes Avenue intersection through that project site. I'll briefly cover some of the project history. As the city manager mentioned, the city has been processing this application for 3 years, and it has changed since then. It's not uncommon for a project to evolve, but I want to emphasize why those changes were made. So in 2017, this project went through a pre-submittal review process, which was required as part of the Transit Corridors Plan for large project near residential uses. And while the project started out smaller with 329 units and 21,180 square feet of commercial space, it was also smaller. And the reason why it was smaller is that originally there was almost 0.76 acres, which was the properties at 601 and 611 El Camino Real that were omitted, and that kind of created an awkward site plan. So the city recommended that the property owner work with that adjacent property owner to acquire the land. That took a considerable amount of time. In the end, what you get is a better project, and you get 2 complete blocks. You get a continuous El Camino Real frontage, which I'll show you in the renderings. But that did take time, but with that additional acreage, it allowed some changes to be made. So when the project was originally redesigned, there were 398 units, and there was roughly 57,000 square feet of commercial space. But as we've learned since 2018, retail has a hard existence right now. There are many vacancies for retail storefronts, even on very successful retail streets such as Burlingame Avenue and at the Tan Fran Shopping Center. So it's a very conscious decision to redesign this project to ensure that the commercial uses would be viable, and that resulted in a reduction in the commercial square footage, the introduction of the high-end grocery store, which was originally not contemplated, and then because of the additional size and the reduction in the commercial square foot, there was the ability to add housing units. I think right now, as you may know, cities are facing a lot of pressure to get housing units, and it was an interest of the cities to provide as much housing on the site because the city's proportion of affordable units is directly proportional to the number of units on this site. So there were a number of changes, as I mentioned, and there was also an education component with the community. The project started with a neighborhood meeting that was held in April 2017. There were 2 subsequent neighborhood meetings in March and May of this year. And the developer and the city listened and, to the extent possible, strived to address those comments. One of the major ones was additional parking well in excess of the city requirements, which I'll talk about later. An extensive amount of studies, including really detailed and exhaustive traffic and parking studies. Also looked at shadow impacts, which was a real concern of the adjacent neighbors. There was also an interest to retain the public parking, which currently exists on private property for the library use, and that would not have been feasible without the widening of Linden Way. Right now it's a substandard width. In addition to having fire and safety concerns with that substandard width, there's not the ability to add parking on the east side of Linden Avenue. And a big concern of the neighborhood, which we've listened to and addressed through project conditions of approval, is the prohibition of any future residents of this project to participate in any future residential parking permit program. A key part of the review was by the Architectural Review Committee. That meeting occurred in March, and again, changes were made as a direct result of that Architectural Review Committee's comments on the project. So another really important thing to point out in the project background is that the city does, as I mentioned, have pressure to build housing. That's put forth by the state of California. The city, through our housing element process, goes through a regional allocation of housing needs, and as you'll see here, that number is high. It started out as 1,155 units. That was 2015. And to date, we've only issued permits for 10% of that. So we are 4 years in, or 3 years in, and we've only issued 10% of the units. So we really have a lot of ground that we frankly need to make up. Also really important to point out that the city has not met our goals for the lower income units. As you'll see here, there's a range of those lower income units, very low, low, and moderate, and we've approved nothing at all in the very low income category. This project would provide a substantial increase in many of those needed categories, such as 26 very low income units, 19 low-income units, and 19 moderate units. Again, we still would have a very high remainder of project of need even with this project, but it really makes a significant effort towards meeting those. It's important to emphasize that the state of California is and will continue to review their state requirements for meeting these goals. And right now, the one that is in effect is that if we lose our housing element annual compliance, which is an annual review that the state does, we will lose grant money. And right now, that would be approximately $160,000. But the state continues to look at other financial penalties for cities, including right now a Senate Bill 102, which is fine cities up to $600,000. The city has voiced opposition, most recently on SB 50, but we emphasize there that what we think we should be able to do is to implement our transit corridor plan, which allows high-density housing near the city's transit corridors. And we emphasize to the state that we have consistently approved housing projects. We've approved 2, the Aperture and 111 San Bruno Avenue, which would provide those 154 units. But I think the state is continually looking for progress that the city's making, and without making the progress, then I think they will continue to examine ways to take away local control, including in areas that communities are very sensitive to, such as parking requirements and setbacks and other controls. So as the city manager mentioned, this project has requested a development agreement. That's a negotiated contract between the city and the developer. The city has traditionally entered into those for larger multi-year construction projects, but that provided the opportunity to negotiate community benefits. So as the city manager pointed out, the most significant one or two were the up to $10 million total public benefit payment that's paid into the city's general fund according to construction timing, and additional extensive provisions related to the affordable housing, as I mentioned, 26 very low-income units, 19 low-income units, and 19 moderate-income units, but also an additional 10 years of affordability, which would be 55 years. The city also negotiated a binding requirement to provide the high-end grocery store. This is not only an implementation of the transit corridor plan, which called for commercial uses, as I pointed out in the corner, but it's also seen as an important ongoing source of revenue for the city through sales tax, as well as jobs. At least 100 jobs would be created, and that would be for the life of the project through this grocery store. It would also be an amenity to the community because it would be walkable and provide important goods to them. As I mentioned, we would also be provided with the 9 new public parking spaces on Linden and the widening of that street, the realignment of canes and installation at the developers of expense and of the installation of a new traffic signal, the extension of the right turn lane from eastbound San Bruno Avenue that would create a little bit more capacity at that intersection, and last, the sales tax point of sale designation, which again would provide the potential for additional sales tax during construction. So that covered the background. I'll dive into a little more detail on the project analysis, hitting on some key topics that have come up in the past. So one of the most common topics that has come up is this issue around building height and massing. So I just wanted to clarify that the voters in 2014 changed the height of this from 3 stories to 5 stories. That set the maximum height of 70 feet. There is a small number of items can encroach up to 10 feet above that, such as an elevator tower or a parapet. Those are allowed under the corridor plan. But this project does have varying heights. In some areas, as I'll show on the renderings, it's 1 story. In some areas, it's 5 stories. There's a very conscious design here to push the taller portions towards El Camino and away from the neighborhood. The 70-foot height is set back 37 to 79 feet from the property line on Linden, but Linden Avenue will get widened, so it's roughly a 60-foot street, and then the residences are set back even further. So you're talking about anywhere from roughly 600 feet to 150 feet away, and there are breaks incorporated into the building that provide the articulation and step backs. And it's important to end with emphasizing this project meets, or frankly substantially exceeds, all of the development standards in the transit corridor plan and meets all of the objective design guidelines. As I mentioned, there's this variety of heights. And this exhibit shows that along Linden Avenue and White Way, there are the 1, 2, and even some 3-story portions here. But you'll see it's sort of like a Lego exercise where the taller portions, which are shown in beige, are towards El Camino Real, San Bruno Avenue, clustered among the streets. And along the transition areas, they're stepping down. And again, located away from the residential uses. The transit corridor plan did require step backs of the upper floors. I just want to point that out here, that along El Camino Real, there has been some concern expressed or interest to push the height closer to El Camino Real, but the transit corridor plan mandates a 15-foot setback of that 5th floor here. Also mandates a 10-foot setback along the street. So the building's already been sort of placed in an optimal location relative to those setbacks and step backs. And also the project does provide some exceedance, as I mentioned. So for example, on the corner, the building is set back 43 feet to create a nice little public plaza here, which would allow for some outdoor seating. And in some other areas, the building's set back a little bit more from the 10 feet. Along Linden Avenue, looking south here, you'll see, again, the project has been stepped down in some areas to 1 story and 2 stories. The plan encourages, does not require the townhomes along this frontage, but it's really important to note that there's sort of this human scale with porch stoops and nice landscaping created here. There is a 10-foot minimum setback, and the project exceeds that, ranging from 11 to 15 feet. But again, there's also a required step back of the upper floors. So above 3 feet here on this frontage, that upper floor has to be stepped back at least 15 feet. This is on Linden Avenue looking north. And again, here you'll see the 1-story portion here and that sort of human scale element. And here you have a rendering. This is a real house that exists there today. And you can see here that human element of the 1-story here. So this project, again, is exceeded because along this frontage, the buildings could be taller under the allowed height under the transit corridor plan. So in addition to height, one of the other really common questions and areas of concern that came up is traffic. So there was an extensive and very detailed traffic study prepared for this project that analyzed the traffic conditions. The way traffic studies are done is you look at the area of peak impacts, which is the AM peak and the PM peak. And this specific study looked at 14 signalized intersections and 5 unsignalized intersections, as well as freeway segments and ramps within the project area. And this project would increase trips, that's a given. There are existing uses on the site that do create trips too. The number of trips that would be created under the final project design, it's important to note again that we made some changes, so these are the final numbers based on the project before you, which is an increase in 222 AM peak hour trips and 213 PM peak hour trips. But the question here is, are those trips and are those traffic impacts any new significant, or are they any substantial increase in what was approved under the and studied under the transit corridor plan? So I did a lot of research on this, and I just wanted to emphasize that the transit corridor plan studied this, and it studied it under 2 scenarios. One was just built out of the general plan, so we do nothing. We don't even adopt the transit corridor plan. We rely on the general plan, which did allow housing in some areas. Then studied additional traffic created by the transit corridor plan. And even without the transit corridor plan, the level of service in many of our intersections would get worse. But the key intersection relative to this project is El Camino Real and San Bruno Avenue. And even without the transit corridor plan, that intersection declines in level of service to substandard conditions. So it's really important to emphasize that we could do basically nothing and we could not approve this project and traffic would still get worse. But from a regulatory perspective, the city did approve a statement of override and approve the EIR. And so those projects were already analyzed, and this project will not increase the severity of previously identified significant impacts. Also really important to emphasize that that intersection is controlled by Caltrans. So while this project, for example, will add a little bit of turn lane depth to the southbound right turn lane, that project is controlled by Caltrans, so the city's ability through that environmental impact report and the transit corridor plan and the general plan was very limited. So we will continue to work and advocate with Caltrans when dealing with an outside agency. The city does not have the ability to implement mitigation measures on those areas because they're outside of our control. So the project will do what's required under the transit corridor plan and the mitigation measures, which is to implement transportation demand management measures. In reality, those are typically very successful depending on the project. So, for example, the project will have on-site bike parking, high-speed internet connections, including through San Bruno cable. And there will be a transit subsidy for new residents and employees when they move in. There will also be on-site services. So what studies have shown is that when you combine goods and services for residents, such as a grocery store or a fitness facility or other small commercial uses, that they tend to walk there, and that just reduces trips. This project would also have an on-site TDM coordinator. So if anyone had any questions about transit usage, that would be facilitated. So another area of concern is parking. So as you may remember, we had a study session with the council in January, and your direction to staff was to prepare the zoning code amendments to increase substantially the parking standards in the transit corridor plan. This project was a pipeline project, and immediately they were informed that they needed to comply with these revised standards. You might remember you had a pipeline project before you in May where that was very challenging to meet. So I want to emphasize that this project responded to that recommendation strongly and actually was able to exceed those recommendations. And to highlight those, for commercial uses, you were clear that they should meet the city code. There shouldn't be any substantial reductions. And I want to emphasize this project substantially exceeds the city code as it exists now for properties even outside the transit corridor plan area. For housing, the recommendation from you was to provide 1 stall per unit for studios and 1-bedroom units and 2 stalls per unit for 2-bedroom units. Those are the state standards, so any project that provides on-site affordable housing like this can follow those. But it was important for the city to provide guest parking, because if there isn't on-site guest parking, those guests tend to spill over into neighborhoods or onto public streets. So in excess of state standards, this project and your recommendation was to provide 0.1 guest spaces per unit. Those are separate than the resident spaces and signed and made available, and there's enforcement. Your direction was to allow mechanical or tandem parking, which this project has a minor amount of, and again, consistent with the state law, to provide that extra guest parking on site. This project has been held to a very high parking standard and exceeded it. And for building A, for the residential uses, there's an excess of 11 stalls compared to those parking requirements. Commercial, there's an excess of 2 stalls. In building B, the residential has a more substantial excess of 41 stalls. The commercial spaces in building B are substantially in excess of city standards at 18 stalls in excess, and overall 72 stalls with 879 total stalls on the site. Numbers are one thing, but we really looked hard at this to say, well, what, in terms of implementation, will ensure those parking spaces are used in the manner they're meant to be used. So there's a binding condition of approval for the life of the project that would prohibit unbundling of spaces. That's when, through a lease or a sales agreement, that the parking stalls are sold separately or they're charged a fee. It is very common in residential projects on the peninsula that parking is a fee on top of the base rent. Sometimes it's as high as $200, which then residents are faced with a choice. We will prohibit that. We will also mandate that there's clear delineation of the parking by use. So again, residential stalls, guest stalls, commercial stalls are all signed and that it's enforced. That's private enforcement done by management. Also really important is wayfinding and parking garage signage. We're looking at that in our downtown, making sure that people know how to find the parking from the public streets, and other measures as required to minimize the potential for spillover parking on the adjacent residential streets. And probably the most aggressive thing that this project will be required to adhere to, as I mentioned earlier, is that residents will be prohibited from participating in any future residential parking permit program. And I want to emphasize the city has the right to refuse those permits to be issued. If anyone attempts to do it, we would have that right to refuse it. and that was something that the property owner agreed to on a voluntary basis. So I'll give a little brief emphasis of the environmental assessment. As I mentioned earlier, there was the Transit Course Plan Environmental Impact Report, which was certified. That was a very exhaustive environmental analysis in addition to traffic. It looked at a number of other subject areas such as noise and air quality, greenhouse gases. It's important to emphasize that that was a program EIR, and what that allows under state laws for subsequent individual projects to rely on that if specific criteria is met. So the city prepared an initial study environmental checklist to thoroughly analyze this project. What that concluded is this project would not result in any new or substantially more severe significant environmental effects than those analyzed in that EIR. That's the test under CEQA. If that test is met, then you can rely on that EIR. It accurately describes the project. We did receive one comment letter right before the Planning Commission meeting that was submitted, and it was later requested to be rescinded. However, it was submitted as part of the record, so the city's CEQA consultant provided a memorandum with responses to the substantive comments that was provided to you for this hearing tonight. The applicant's attorney provided a response, and we also published a revised initial study environmental checklist to be very thorough. That initial study checklist relied on a number of special studies. So I mentioned we did the parking and the traffic study, but we also looked at utilities such as sewer, water, and stormwater. There was a noise analysis specifically for this project, a very detailed parking analysis, hazardous materials analysis, historic resource evaluation, which is required when any buildings of this age are being demolished, geotechnical study, and those studies were all completed and thoroughly reviewed by the city and our environmental consultant. There have been some questions raised about shadow impacts. There was a detailed shadow study that indicated there would be an insignificant amount of new shading that would happen only during the periods during the winter months and only in the early morning. So we did a very complete analysis of the project, and again, that's part of what's taken the 3 years, but as I mentioned, there's also been changes in the project over that time. So last, I'll conclude by emphasizing the fiscal benefits to the city. So as it was mentioned, there is a cash payment of up to $10 million to the city's general fund. There is also a substantial amount of base building permit revenue of $1.4 million. There's other associated permit fees, water and sewer capacity fees, business license taxes, which are ongoing, other ongoing revenue sources such as cable account revenues, other utility connection fees, billing revenue. When a property like this is redeveloped, it is reassessed. There's no grandfathering in under Prop 13, so the estimate of net new property tax annually is roughly $380,000. New sales tax from the grocery store and the commercial uses would be roughly $150,000. And as a voluntary measure and not a city requirement, the property owner has signed a project labor agreement that commits to the use of union labor throughout construction of the project. There would be a number of construction-related jobs, but the grocery store does also provide a number of ongoing jobs in the city. Again, that implements the Transit Corridor Plan, which was very much an economic initiative plan, as well as a goal to ensure that the city had opportunities created to allow housing to meet our regional housing needs allocation. So the Planning Commission held the public hearing on June 18th. There was extensive community input. A number of questions came out of the public input that we provided responses to that night. They held the public hearing. They ultimately voted 5-0. There were 2 recusals due, again, to conflict of interests, to forward the project to the City Council for approval. Planning Commission subsequently passed a separate motion to request the staff to work with the developer to explore any opportunity at all to lower the height and report that back to the City Council. So staff has met several times with the applicant to discuss this request, and the response there is that the loss of that upper floor, which would have 86 units, would make the project financially infeasible. And they'll go into that in a little more detail tonight in their presentation. So in conclusion, tonight's action, the request of the City Council is to approve the project Again, there are a number of actions before you tonight. There would be the introduction of 2 ordinances, which would come back for the second reading, an adoption at a subsequent meeting, and 3 resolutions. Those resolutions would approve the plan development permit, architecture review permit, phased vesting tentative tract map, and the installation of the loading zones. So that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions, or we can move into the applicant's presentation.
I think for time, I'd like to go into the applicants, and then I'd like to open it up to, if the council's okay, suggest go right to public comment for those who may need to depart or what have you, to be respectful of their time.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak tonight. My name is Tom Qualia. I'm part of the development team with Signature Development. I'm a partner. I am joined tonight by Mike Gilmetti, the president and owner of the company, as well as my partner. We're here to present and talk to you about our project. Very excited to be here. This is a classic transit-oriented development that takes advantage of the proximity to both the bus routes along El Camino Real, as well as the recently updated San Bruno Caltrans station. It's critical to understand we have been brought in as the development partner to the G.W. Williams family, who has owned and developed this property for over 70 years. The family is long-standing San Bruno family as well as Peninsula. They own, manage, and maintain their assets for a very long time. The grandparents started this, and the next generation has taken off and continue to be a steward of these properties throughout the peninsula. In this particular case, they're going to be building and redeveloping the site, as well as owning and managing the 2 buildings. So the accountability will be to our team as it relates to the construction, and it will be to the G.W. Williams continued legacy of owning and managing a very, very exciting asset. I wanted to talk a little bit Signature Development. We are tried and true infill developers, mixed-use developers throughout the Bay Area, a lot of transit-oriented development. So when this opportunity came along, we were very excited to be able to work on something this exciting. Staff did a very thorough job. Staff report is very good. And this project from day one relied on the excellent documents that were in place for us. The TCP is probably one of the better specific plans me as a former planner has ever worked with. The detail, the history, the site criteria, very well laid out and very exhausted and very demanding. So we complied with that from day one. In this particular case, I wanted to just hit on a little bit of our strategies as it relates to the site. From day one, we wanted to activate the corners as asked for by the TCP. We also wanted to design this as much as possible so that all the activity could be away from the neighborhood and be down on the more busier edges of the project. So in this particular case, like loading zones, we put those opposite commercial use. The right-hand turn lane in the plaza is down here in a very open area, public, away from the neighborhood. The 2 corners are activated with plazas and both commercial and amenity spaces, as well as the corner down here. And then the access to the site, as staff has pointed out, is really concentrated on the edges and along Canes. So we've done as much as we possibly could to organize the site in a manner to have minimal impacts on there. As staff pointed out, we created this exhibit to show how this project goes in and out and up and down. This is a plan view as it relates to different heights. And once again, we tried to concentrate the heights out on the El Camino, San Bruno, Angus, and Canes, and then transition those back here as it relates to the interface with the neighborhood. So we actually have 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5-story buildings. What all those in and outs give you is a series of 1-story plazas. So once again, looking at these plan views, you can see all of these breaks in the building and plazas to give us actually the antithesis of what development on El Camino Real has been doing, where it's been all shoeboxes pushed right out to the minimum setbacks. So you can see in this particular project, everything you see here, these are all one-story elements and sprinkled throughout the street frontages so we get that variety. And then we take a very thoughtful approach to the back, and this is an augmented exhibit from our previous proposals. This is White Way, showing how we have an extensive amount of one-story buildings and then transition up to 2.5 and 3 stories. And we wanted to highlight these heights here. So on El Camino Real, we are 12 feet lower than this side, this western side. So in this particular case, my eyes aren't quite as good as they used to be. I think we're at, excuse me, I thought I'd be able to see this. I think we're at 13 feet, 13 feet on the single story, 26 feet on the 2 and the 2.5 story, 37 on the 3, and then in the background, the 5-story portion that's in the central spine of this project, in this particular location here, is 54 feet and not the 70 feet. You do see the elevator shafts at this end, and there's an elevator shaft down at this end that go beyond that 54 feet, but as seen from the western elevation along Linden here, you can see the varieties of the heights. And then if you go to the next slide, you can see how this translates into this pedestrian scale along Linden Avenue, where we have these single-story, 2-story, 3-story elements. And those elements then went down to pedestrian level with the use of pitched roofs, very prominent front door locations along the streetscape. And a lot of those came out of work with the Architecture Review Committee, which was really, really effective for us. So we tried to take the backside of the building, minimize the impacts. We tried to, this gives you another view from Linden. We tried to create a different articulation in terms of materials and wood, and a much more common, and then obviously concentrated the higher density along El Camino Real. A very thoughtful design for this whole project. So if you look at the way the detailing of each floor, bike parking is spread out throughout the building. The affordable units are dispersed throughout the building, both in Structure A and Structure B, so that they're not concentrated all in one particular location. And then we made a pensive gesture to make sure that there's excess storage, so we don't have overflow situations with regards to people's lifestyle. So overall, this is the project that we have before you that reflects the TCP and everything that staff highlighted. We're excited. I'm going to have my committee come up and talk just a little bit about public benefits, and then we'll make ourselves available to answer any questions. Thank you.
Morning, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. I'm Mike Calmetti with Signature Development Group. It's a pleasure to be here, and I too would like to thank staff for a very thorough report. I think, candidly, they stole a lot of my thunder in terms of presentation, but a couple of things I want to note here. First off, I think we highlighted some of the project benefits. We think it's very important to note the fees, the annual revenues, the project labor agreement, and the jobs that will be created here. And these will be, jobs that can be local jobs. Some notes here, because there are a lot of misconceptions about transit-oriented development. So this is a project that's very close to BART and Caltrain, and the projects we've been building and observed in studies and demographic studies and analyses in the Greater Peninsula area, for instance, show a lot less car use, a lot more bicycle or pedestrian use, and a lot of the folks that live here will work somewhere between San Francisco and San Jose and be readily accessible via BART or Caltrain. So we're actually seeing less parking by a factor of 2/3 than we're required to put in here. We volunteered for this. And over the period of 3 years, there's been a number of asks from the city, and we've stepped up every time to meet those. But I think it's important to point that out. We've also followed, again, as was pointed out by staff, the TCP plan and the Measure N guidelines. This is a very difficult project to put together. There was assemblage involved with the adjacent parcel, a number of meetings with neighborhood and community trying to address a number of their concerns, and again, a number of staff concerns that we've stepped up and met. The affordable housing is a key component to this as well. There are very few projects that are bringing affordable housing together with their project. Many cities allow for developers to, quote, fee out, which means basically write a check and deliver the concerns to someone else to take care of. So what we've said here is that we're willing to move forward and build these. We're willing to disperse them throughout the project so they get built out over time as the project gets built out. And having a grocery store available here for the market rate and affordable housing units also helps disperse traffic, because again, the folks here and candidly the folks in the neighborhood will be more likely to be able to walk to this grocery store and eliminate a lot of the trips that they make in the evening on their way back from work or on the weekends. I think the other significant thing I want to point out is the traffic signal at Canes. I don't think that gets enough attention. We think it will divert a tremendous amount of traffic away from San Bruno Avenue and El Camino, because a lot of the folks on the other side, the south side there of Canes, will basically just use that. And our residents will, the commercial, the primary commercial and the residential frontages are on El Camino. So I think those are some really key things as you hear those in favor or against the project after me. One thing I did want to make clear is that we are available to answer questions, and we'd like to be able to address some of the things that come up as requested by staff or council, and certainly from the folks and the public who are here today. As my partner Tom pointed out, we've been doing this for 25 years in the Bay Area. We are very proud of the projects we built around the Bay Area in big cities and small cities. Small cities like San Rafael or Novato, Sunnyvale, Daly City. We've got projects in Menlo Park and Mountain View, and a number in the East Bay and Oakland, et cetera. So we're very proud of those, and we think that this project will be a great addition. I think it will be the most architecturally pleasing project built in many years because of the articulation and diversity of product. So I do want to appreciate your time tonight, and we're available for questions and comments.
Okay, thank you. Is that it? Madam Clerk, how many speaker cards do we have, please?
We have 46.
Okay. So we have 46 speaker cards that have turned in. I'm not the best at math, but it's somewhere about 138, 140 minutes. So here's what I might suggest. If we can, please, when the clerk calls up to the podium, if you're going to hear a couple names, if you can kind of make your way up, that'll save some time, rather than each person one by one coming from their chair. Two, if I can suggest that if you've heard comments from the prior speaker and they echo yours, you can certainly let us know that. So, but I don't want to deprive anybody of what other information that they want to provide as well. I would also ask that, again, when the speakers are speaking, that we allow them to speak in their entirety, that we hold and refrain from comments, clapping, and other things, and we can certainly do that at the end. But, and again, as Steve had suggested, if somebody wants to say, how many are you here for this or that, that's certainly okay too. So with that said, if that suggestion is okay with the audience, we're going to go and try the 3 minutes. Now, I'm going to be candid. We may need to break for the restroom. So bear that in mind if that is a need. But that's trying to get through everybody. The clerk has, the timer is there. There's a yellow light that will go on. There's also going to be a beep that sounds at the conclusion of the time. She'll also, I know she's at an angle, but she'll go ahead and hold up 30 seconds and then time's up, just for a visual, just to kind of try to keep us on track. I think this is the only way I can suggest that we get through everybody who wants to have those full 3 minutes, if we can all do that together, I think we begin the process, and I would appreciate your cooperation, and I thank you for being here. Madam Clerk, if you can call 4 or 5 up, please.
Thomas Miller, followed by Jim Ruane, Alexander Melendrez, and Steve Freitas.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. My only concern is, from a union perspective, they have said they've signed a labor agreement. Okay, can everybody hear me now? Okay, sorry. All I'm saying is, if they signed a labor agreement, I expect for them to abide by it. And as you know, affordable housing is the big issue, not only here in San Bruno, but all over California and the nation. And I hope that you'll hold their feet to the fire to make sure that they get as many affordable units. We need to solve our homeless problem, and they need to be the solution, not the problem. And I want to thank you for your time. I yield to the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please. And then the others that have been called up, if you can make your way up to the podium, please.
Good evening. I'm Jim Ruane, the very proud former mayor of the wonderful city of San Bruno. I wanted to speak to you this evening on my support for the Mills Park project. When I was mayor, I had the opportunity to meet with the Williams Group when they explained their interest in this project while it was still on the drawing boards. I know it has been planned for quite a number of years, even before Signature got involved, ranging from what was pretty much of a box with a courtyard to what is proposed today, a beautiful project. Many of us attended numerous meetings when the city launched the Transit Corridors Plan and then passed Measure N in 2014. Measure N on the November ballot that year was the result of over 2 years of research, collaboration, and foresight for the vision of San Bruno then and for the future. The collaboration included residents, business owners, and city officials, the result of which is a comprehensive blueprint for responsible development in selected areas within our Transit Corridors Plan area. This project is a direct result of that collaboration. Now is the time to take advantage of the influx of business looking to San Bruno as a place to locate. Jobs, housing, and commercial development will be the positive result for the city we all call home. I don't know about you, but I'm tired of driving by the site and seeing half-empty car lots and poorly maintained storefronts advertising closeout sales that seem to go on forever. We are in desperate need of housing in this city, and 425 new units would definitely put a dent in that need, not to mention the revenue generated by new retail. After 22 years on this city council, I know firsthand that you can't please everyone, but in the overall, I always tried to find the benefit for San Bruno as a whole. This is a good project, needed in our city, and I encourage you to vote positively. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Alexander Melendrez, followed by Linda Freitas, Steve Freitas, and Robert Reichel.
Hello, Honorable City Council and City staff. My name is Alex Melendrez, and I'm here representing the Housing Leadership Council of San Mateo County, or HLC. As a nonprofit that works with leaders in their communities to produce and preserve quality, affordable homes, HLC has endorsed the Mills Park Plaza development in San Bruno. We are thrilled to see 425 homes, transit-oriented homes, 64 of which are at the deepest affordable income levels, move forward for those who are already here and those who want to be here, as well as those who are the most vulnerable. It is rare, as somebody who does this for a living, it is rare to see a private developer providing dispersed and deeply affordable units at this quantity. Now let me speak as a 26-year born and raised resident of the city of San Bruno. Here's my story. I live with my parents. That stigma died 20 years ago. I want to stay here in San Bruno, in my community, but there's so little housing stock here, I can't find a space to afford to live. I live with 6 family members, 5 of which are adults who earn an income. If we can't afford to live anywhere on our own, imagine how hard it is for those who have a larger family or for those who are renting. I am lucky that I haven't been displaced. I'm well aware of my fortune, and there are those who have already been pushed out and have situations much worse than I do. There are those who already have been pushed out and they needed housing yesterday. Height limits and delays only further this kind of displacement. When no or little housing goes up, those who are barely hanging on are the first ones to push out, the last ones to attend, and the last ones to speak. The San Bruno I know and love can continue to grow and improve and be a welcoming and diverse community with proposed developments like this one. As one of the younger speakers said earlier, there's a climate change issue. And there was a New York Times article stating on why housing is climate change policy. Supporting greater infill and higher density is part of that solution. Please approve this housing, not for the future, but what was needed for yesterday. Thank you for your courage and leadership in moving these needed homes forward.
Thank you. Next, please.
Linda Freitas, followed by Steve Freitas, Robert Reichel, and Ozzy Deshevsky.
Hi, Honorable Mayor and City Council. We have lived in San Bruno for almost 39 years, of which 33 years have been in our current home in Mills Park. Just a quick picture as to why people are so upset. We live 12 houses from Linden Avenue, and we have not found out through any other means other than attending a party in Bodega Bay, and an ex-resident told us. We will be directly impacted since we have no way to exit our street without crossing Canes. Same stands for Sycamore and Cypress. We know the 300-foot notice, and they went 600 feet. Still not enough on a project that will affect everyone in San Bruno. And this shows you how wrong the limited notification is. 12 houses away, not within the area of notification. This project needs to be reduced in size, period. Mills Park shouldn't have to provide a third of the entire quota needed for San Bruno to meet its number of units for the TCP, which, by the way, is not mandatory. No penalty if not met. Let's spread this out. I am concerned about both parking structures exiting onto Canes. This is another piece of information you will never be told. I specifically asked this question to the developer at the community meeting they held at Allen. I was told that they do exit onto Canes. You have never heard that mentioned again. They only speak about the entrances. Can you imagine those cars, along with the additional students that will be attending Allen once it's completed? Traffic is already an issue on Canes. Add additional cars, students, Uber, Lyft, and Lyft vehicles, and it's a disaster. From some research, it appears the developer is building as apartments, and they will be converted to condos, I bet before they are even completed. City staff at the Planning Commission meeting, quote, that if built as condos, it would cost the developer more in fees, end of quote. Funny, since all documents state apartments, but city staff has referenced them as condos. Sure appears that something is being done that isn't on the up and up. Have they been allowed to build in this manner to avoid higher fees in return to be able to convert? And the city still receives their $10 million, and the city would still be losing the additional fees. On the subject of the developer, they are not giving you all the information. Must think we're really stupid regarding commute traffic. Quote, 260 cars in the morning. Never mentioned till the commissioner pressed, the planning commissioner that is, that this was just 1 hour of the morning commute. Do the math. We're looking at 800 to 1,000, if not more, cars a day moving around in this area between a 40,000 square foot grocery store, not including the school and library.
Linda?
I'm absolutely against this project, and as it stands, it needs to be reduced in size, the 50-foot mark, and additional parking, and address the traffic concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, audience. Okay, who's next? Mr. Freitas or Mr. Freitas?
Steve Freitas, followed by...
And again, audience, I'd ask if we could just let the speakers come, and please, if we could be mindful of the time, so we all keep and have that same opportunity. I know there's a lot to be said, but I want to get through us all. So thank you. Steve.
Hi, Honorable Mayor and Council. I voted yes on Measure A, and I believe we do need development. But if the project presented was the intent then I was mistaken by the $400,000 campaign supported by our former mayor, former city manager, some council members, and people within the community. Now, having read the measure completely and seeing the scope of this project, I would have voted no. Having attended the Planning Commission meeting on June 18th, I was taken back at how the planning director seemed to force the commission into a yes vote, telling them if they voted no, the project would have to start from scratch. Similar to what she stated tonight, telling you if it isn't 5 stories, it isn't going to be built. Now you have a chance to make this right by amending the height, the exiting, and requiring a new EIR. Not using one that was drafted in 2020 prior to the 40% increase on Measure A. In closing, it is utmost important for you to get this right. It will be the signature for the future of development. And just remember, people voted for the bullet train to nowhere. Former Governor Jerry Brown pushed for it, and the new governor stopped it and amended it. You are the new mayor and the new council. Make this right for San Bruno and the neighborhood of Mills Park.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Robert Rico, followed by Ozzie Deshevsky, Gary Pollock, and Nancy Foreman.
Honorable Mayor and Councilor Robert Rico, I just want to commend the developer for listening to the people. They have proposed 72 additional parking places over and above what the council requires. They've made other concessions. They have got the step back on the Linden Avenue side. So the developer should be commended for that, and I hope you continue to work with him.
Thank you. Next, please.
Ozzie Deshevsky, followed by Gary Pollock, Nancy Foreman, and Joyce Hanley.
Honorable Mayor, council members, my concerns regarding this project revolve around BKF Tech Memorandum dated 12/18/2018 and 12/13/2018. It's regarding something on your website, job number 20160-157-11, a sewer upgrade program proposal. This was based on 400 units, the original total for this project. The original proposal was revised July 3rd of this year, up to 425 units. The sewer upgrade project that was originally proposed to service 400 residential units was replaced. The 10-inch lines were replaced with 14-inch lines, and that was defined in those memos mentioned earlier. But it was completed. It was completed on December 18th of 2014. That's when the sewer lines were replaced. The key issue here, will the replaced sewer mains be adequate to handle the increased load? Probably not, which means we're going to have sewer problems. The domestic water demand, based on the original estimate of 400 residential units. The original total gallons per day usage for 400 units was 59,430 gallons per day. You add another 25 units, which is 1/16 or 6.25%, and you wind up with a grand total of 63,144 gallons per day needed to support the project. So the key issue here is that, number one, no work has been scheduled to upgrade those water lines. Another thing, PG&E. PG&E has been contacted, as I was advised by a conversation I had with Mr. Michael Smith on July 3rd. Guess what? They haven't responded yet. I'm done.
Thank you for your comments. Next speaker, audience, please. Next speaker, please.
Gary Pollock, followed by Nancy Foreman, Joyce Hanley, and Kathy Heckman.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Gary Pollock. I live in the 100 block of Poplar, and in 2014 I voted no on Measure N because parking already was idiotic in our neighborhood. I'm retired now, but I used to work 8 a.m. till 11 p.m. in San Francisco, and there were nights I got home, could I not only park in front of my house, but not even on my street. I had to go to other streets, and I knew that this was going to be a problem, especially with the multiple people living in units on our street and in apartments that are being built on the corner of San Bruno and El Camino. It's not right that you expect that only 1 or 2 people are going to live in these apartments. Right now, the trend is for multiple people to live in, especially with flop houses around here for the airline industry. And who's going to say that's not going to happen here? We're not taking into account what it's doing to the neighborhood, which is what part of the TCP says, that we're supposed to take care of our neighborhood. And the infrastructure, I don't think, can handle this huge of a project because, I mean, the sewers in our neighborhoods are just disastrous. I just would like to know how we can use an EIR that was studied in 2012 and approved in 2013, since YouTube has grown extensively, and also Walmart and all those people in Bay Hill. The traffic issues are far greater than they were 7 years ago. I'm sorry. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Next, please.
Nancy Foreman, followed by Joyce Hanley, Kathy Heckman, and Marcia Glassner.
Honorable Mayor and Council members, name is Nancy Foreman. I live at the south end of San Bruno Avenue on Poplar. Mills Park project will greatly impact me every time I drive on El Camino Real, San Bruno Avenue, go to BART, Caltrain, or Tanforan Shopping Center. I too am positively against a project of this magnitude. Let me be clear. I'm not against building, just against the height and size adjacent to a single-family, single-story residential neighborhood. We're less than a month away from the city and developers' timeline to avoid impact fees. Money and a deadline are not enough reason to approve this project. There needs to be an audit of the impact fees to determine if the amount of money designated is enough to cover the rebuilding of the infrastructure. This project will impact the city of San Bruno forever. It will only serve as precedent for future projects of this size, which there are many in the pipeline. Referring to the February 12, 2013 Environmental Impact Report, the following requirements have not been met. In Exhibit A, Bullet 4, page 99, the city has not improved and expanded the transit and pedestrian and bicycle connections. LUD 30, page 101, the city has not developed a shuttle route to connect BART Caltrain with the rest of the city. And in Bullet 7, page 99, this project does not preserve and protect the residential neighborhood. The biggest thing I'm concerned about is that the City Planning Commission has worked with the developer for over 3 years, and the City Council gets 1 meeting to decide and vote. This is not a standalone project. The infrastructure issues that I mentioned have not been met. This project is clearly not ready to move forward. Mr. Mayor and Council members, it's your responsibility to vote against this project as it's been presented to you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Joyce?